The moment I found my parents while hidden in my dad's desk drawer, my hands started shaking. Not because of what was in it, but because of what wasn't. After 16 years of sacrificing everything, working myself into the hospital, giving them over $300,000 of my own money, I discovered that everything, the house, the life insurance, even my childhood furniture, was going to my lazy sister Brooklyn, who hasn't worked a day in her life. But it wasn't just the will that made my blood run cold. It was finding the bank statements showing they had secretly saved over $200,000 in disability payments while claiming they were broke. It was discovering the life insurance policy worth $320,000 they never told me about. It was realizing that while I was destroying my health to pay their bills, they were planning a future that didn't include me. My sister Brooklyn? The woman who's 31 years old and has never held a job for more than 2 weeks? She was inheriting everything. And when I confronted them about it, what my father said next made me realize I had been nothing more than their personal ATM for 16 years. So I did something that changed everything. Something that exposed the truth about who my family really was. And by the time I was done, Brooklyn's shocked face when she realized I had become more successful than she ever dreamed of being was just the beginning. Let me tell you how a girl who was told she'd never amount to anything became the one saving lives while her perfect, lazy sister destroys them. Because what I did next didn't just change my life, it changed everything. Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible story, I need your help. This channel is brand new and I'm putting my heart and soul into bringing you the most compelling real-life revenge stories. If you want to see how this incredible journey ends and what Ellie did that shocked her entire family, please hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like if you're already feeling invested, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps me continue bringing you these powerful stories that need to be heard. My name is Ellie, I'm 34 years old, and I need to share this story because keeping it inside has been eating me alive. For 16 years, I gave up everything for people who never saw my worth. And I'm not talking about small sacrifices here. I'm talking about my health, my dreams, my entire youth, and over $300,000 of my hard-earned money. My family consists of my parents, David and Carol, and my sister Brooklyn, who's 31. To understand how deep this betrayal goes, you need to understand our family dynamic and just how lazy Brooklyn really is. I was always the responsible one, the caregiver, the problem solver, the one who handled crisis after crisis. I was the one who got good grades, helped around the house, and had part-time jobs from the age of 15. Brooklyn was the free spirit who needed to find herself, which apparently meant everyone else had to pay for her endless journey of self-discovery. Brooklyn has never, and I mean never, held a steady job. At 31 years old, the longest she's ever been employed anywhere was 3 weeks at a clothing store, and she quit because the manager didn't appreciate her creative input on the window displays. She's tried being an actress, a photographer, a jewelry maker, a lifestyle blogger, and a spiritual wellness coach. Every single one of these careers lasted less than 6 months and made zero money. But somehow, in my parents' eyes, Brooklyn was the one with real potential, while I was just the backup daughter whose job was to keep everyone afloat financially. I gave up 16 years of my life for people who never saw my worth. And I had no idea how expendable I was to them until I found that that left everything to my lazy, unemployed sister. It all started when I was 18 years old. I was a senior in high school, had been accepted to nursing school with a partial scholarship, and I thought my life was finally beginning. I had worked so hard. I graduated with a 3.8 GPA while working part-time at a local diner to save money for college. I had my whole future planned out. Then everything changed in one terrible week. My dad had a massive stroke. He was only 51, and it came out of nowhere while he was watching TV on a Sunday evening. He survived, thank God, but the stroke left him with partial paralysis on his left side and severe speech difficulties. The man who used to fix cars and build furniture could barely hold a fork. While we were still processing that nightmare, my mom was diagnosed with severe rheumatoid arthritis. Her hands became so swollen and painful that she couldn't even button her shirts, let alone continue working her job as a bank teller. The arthritis was aggressive and debilitating. Some days she couldn't even get out of bed. In the span of 1 week, both my parents went from being fully employed and independent to being unable to work and needing constant care. The medical bills started pouring in immediately, tens of thousands of dollars in hospital stays, rehabilitation, specialists, medications. Their disability applications were going to take months to process, and we had no income coming in. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, looking at a stack of bills that seemed to grow taller every day, while my dad struggled to form sentences and my mom cried from the pain in her joints. That's when they sat me down for the conversation that would change my life forever. They asked me to defer nursing school for just 1 year to help with the medical bills and take care of them. They promised it would only be temporary, just until they got back on their feet and their disability benefits started coming through. They said Brooklyn was too young and sensitive to handle this kind of responsibility. She was only 15 at the time and had her whole life ahead of her. I believed them. I actually believed it would be 1 year. Meanwhile, Brooklyn's reaction to our family crisis was to become even more dramatic and demanding. While I was scrambling to figure out how to pay medical bills, she was complaining that the stress was affecting her grades and that she needed extra money for art supplies because creativity was her outlet for processing trauma. When Brooklyn turned 18 3 years later, instead of getting a job to help the family, she announced that she was moving to California to pursue her acting career. And somehow, my parents managed to send her money for the move. When I asked how they could afford to help her relocate across the country while claiming we were broke, they said Brooklyn had saved money from babysitting jobs. Even then, it didn't add up. Brooklyn had maybe babysat 5 times total in her entire life, and she usually spent whatever money she made immediately on clothes or makeup. But I was too exhausted from working 2 jobs and caregiving to question it too deeply. Let me give you some specific examples of what my life became over the next several years, because I need you to understand the level of sacrifice we're talking about here, and just how entitled and lazy Brooklyn was during this entire time. By the time I was 22, I was working over 60 hours a week at 2 retail jobs just to keep our heads above water. I worked at Target from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., then went straight to my evening job at a department store until closing at 10 p.m. I did this 6 days a week, every week, for years. Sundays were my day off, which I spent doing laundry, grocery shopping, cooking meals for the week, taking my parents to medical appointments, cleaning the house, and managing all their medications and insurance paperwork. I developed chronic insomnia because I couldn't shut my brain off at night. I was constantly calculating bills, worried about money, planning the next day's schedule, wondering how I was going to make everything work. I started having panic attacks in my early 20s. My hair was falling out from stress. I gained 40 pounds from eating fast food because I didn't have time to cook for myself, and I couldn't afford healthy food anyway because every penny went to the family. During this same time period, Brooklyn was in California living her best life. Her Instagram was full of photos from beach parties, expensive restaurants, shopping trips, and trendy apartment tours. When I asked my parents how she was affording this lifestyle on a struggling actress's income, they'd get vague and defensive. They'd say things like, Brooklyn is very resourceful, or she has friends who help her out, or she's networking, which is important for her career. But here's what really hurt. Every time Brooklyn came home for holidays from California, my parents would throw these elaborate welcome home parties. They'd spend hundreds of dollars on food, decorations, and gifts, inviting extended family over to celebrate their successful actress daughter. They'd hang a Welcome Home Brooklyn banner, cook all her favorite meals, and buy expensive champagne to toast her Hollywood adventures. Meanwhile, I was sleeping on the living room couch because I had given up my bedroom to make space for my dad's medical equipment and wheelchair accessibility. I'd work a double shift on Christmas Eve, come home exhausted, and find the house decorated like a movie set for Brooklyn's arrival. Brooklyn would hold court at these parties, telling exaggerated stories about her auditions, her almost callbacks, and her connections in the industry. She'd show everyone photos from movie premieres she'd somehow attended and name-drop celebrities she'd supposedly met. My parents would beam with pride and tell everyone how Brooklyn was about to make it big. When relatives would ask about me, my parents would give vague answers like, "Ellie's working retail right now," or "She's taking a break from school to help us out." No mention of the 60-hour work weeks or the fact that I was single-handedly keeping the family financially afloat. I'll never forget my 28th birthday. It was a Tuesday, and I was supposed to have the evening off for once. I had planned to just watch a movie and order pizza, nothing fancy, but it was my birthday, and I wanted one night where I didn't have to think about anyone else's needs. At 6 p.m., just as I was settling down with my movie, my dad started having chest pains and trouble breathing. I rushed him to the emergency room, where we spent the next 8 hours finding out he was having another minor heart episode. False alarm, thankfully, but it required extensive monitoring and tests. While I'm sitting in that hospital waiting room, exhausted and worried sick, wearing the same clothes I'd worked in all day, my phone starts buzzing with Instagram notifications. Brooklyn was posting photos from some rooftop party in Venice Beach, with captions about living her best life and grateful for family who believes in her dreams. The party looked expensive, fancy cocktails, designer dresses on her and her friends, professional photographer taking candid shots. She was wearing a dress that I recognized as being worth at least $300, and her makeup looked professionally done. The location was clearly some upscale rooftop bar with an infinity pool and ocean views. And I'm thinking, how is she affording this lifestyle when she's a struggling actress who hasn't booked a job in months? But I pushed those thoughts away because that's what I always did. I focused on taking care of everyone else and never questioned where the money was coming from. The breaking point came when I was 26, after 8 years of this grinding routine. I was still working 2 jobs, still giving almost all my money to my parents, still handling all their care needs. I hadn't been on a vacation in 8 years. I hadn't been on a date in 3 years because who has time for relationships when you're working 60+ hours a week and caregiving during every free moment? I hadn't been to a movie theater in over 2 years. I hadn't bought myself new clothes in 18 months. I was wearing shoes with holes in them because I couldn't justify spending money on myself when my parents needed help with bills. Meanwhile, Brooklyn had just posted photos from a weekend trip to Napa Valley with her artist friends, staying at some boutique vineyard resort that probably cost more per night than I made in a week. I was stocking shelves at Target one morning when everything went black. I woke up on the floor with paramedics standing over me and my manager looking terrified. Customers were gathered around staring at me like I was some kind of spectacle. It was humiliating and terrifying at the same time. They rushed me to the emergency room, ironically, the same hospital where I'd spent so many nights with my dad. The doctor ran a bunch of tests and gave me news that should have been a wake-up call. I was having stress-induced heart palpitations. My blood pressure was dangerously high for someone my age. My cortisol levels were through the roof. My body was basically in a constant state of fight or flight response. He told me, very seriously, that if I didn't make major changes to reduce my stress immediately, I was risking permanent damage to my cardiovascular system. He used words like early heart disease and stroke risk for a 26-year-old, which was terrifying. When my parents came to visit me in the hospital, they stayed for exactly 20 minutes. They asked if I was okay. I said the doctors thought I'd be fine, and they left to go prepare for Brooklyn's surprise visit home. Apparently, she had decided to come back from LA for a week because she was feeling disconnected from family. They spent the rest of that day and the next 2 days preparing for her arrival, cooking her favorite meals, decorating the house, calling relatives to come celebrate her homecoming, shopping for expensive ingredients to make the elaborate dinner she'd requested. I was released from the hospital with instructions to rest, reduce stress, and consider counseling for anxiety management. I came home to a house buzzing with party preparations for my sister. There were flowers everywhere, champagne chilling in the refrigerator, and my mom was wearing an actual dress because Brooklyn's visit was a special occasion. That night, lying on the couch listening to them excitedly plan Brooklyn's welcome party while I tried to process the fact that I'd almost had a heart attack at 26, I realized something that changed everything. These people didn't care if I lived or died. They cared about what I could provide for them, but not about me as a person. If I had died on that Target floor, their main concern would have been who was going to pay the bills next month. That's when I made a decision that would change my life forever. At 26 years old, sitting on that couch in a house decorated for my lazy sister's homecoming party while I recovered from a stress-induced medical emergency, I decided I was going to become a nurse no matter what it took. And I was going to do it in secret. I secretly enrolled in the evening nursing program at our local community college. I used my employee discount at Target to buy used textbooks, and I told my parents the classes were computer training for work advancement. I knew if they found out I was pursuing nursing school, they'd either try to talk me out of it or find ways to sabotage it because it would interfere with my availability to help them. The schedule was absolutely brutal. I still had to work both jobs during the day to pay the family bills. There was no way around that. Then I'd race from my evening retail job straight to classes from 6 to 10 p.m. 4 nights a week. I'd get home around 10:30, grab whatever leftover food was in the kitchen, and study until 2 or 3 in the morning. Then I'd wake up at 5:30 to get ready for my morning shift at Target. I was running on about 3 hours of sleep most nights. I was drinking so much coffee that my hands would shake. I lost 20 pounds because I was constantly moving and barely eating real meals. But something amazing was happening. For the first time in my adult life, I was doing something that was just for me. And I was good at it. Really, really good. My anatomy and physiology professor, Dr. Martinez, pulled me aside after the first exam, which I had aced despite studying in my car between jobs, and asked if I'd ever considered healthcare as a serious career path. I almost laughed. I told him I was 26, had been out of school for 8 years, was working 2 retail jobs, and this was probably just a pipe dream. He said something I'll never forget. "Ellie, you have natural healing instincts and an intuitive understanding of the human body that can't be taught. You ask questions that show you're thinking like a nurse already. Don't let anyone convince you that it's too late to follow your calling, and don't let anyone tell you that taking care of yourself is selfish." It was like he could see right through me. When my parents eventually found out I was taking classes, my mom saw my textbooks in my car about 6 months into the program. Their reaction was exactly what I expected, but it still hurt. My dad said, "You're 26 years old, Ellie. It's time to grow up and face reality. This family needs you here, paying bills and taking care of us, not chasing some fantasy about being a nurse. You missed your chance for college when you chose to help us instead." My mom added, "Brooklyn has real talent and a real chance at making something of herself. Someone has to be practical and keep this family afloat while she pursues her dreams. You're good at taking care of people. Just do it here where you're needed." But for the first time in my adult life, I didn't cave. I looked at them and said, "I'm going to finish this program whether you support me or not." The silence that followed was deafening. In my clinical rotations, something incredible started happening that made me realize I had found my true calling. Patients began specifically requesting me, not just any nursing student, but me specifically. Children would calm down when I walked into their rooms, even when they were scared and in pain. Elderly patients would tell their families that the girl with the kind eyes made them feel safe and heard. My clinical instructor told me she'd never seen a student with such intuitive medical instincts. I could walk into a room and somehow sense what a patient needed before they even told me. It wasn't magic. It was just that all those years of caregiving for my parents had taught me to read people's pain, anticipate their needs, and provide comfort in crisis situations. I was at the top of my class despite being exhausted from working and studying. My professors were encouraging me to apply to 4-year bachelor programs, telling me I had the potential to go as far as I wanted in healthcare. One professor even offered to write me recommendation letters for competitive nursing schools. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Meanwhile, Brooklyn was still in LA, and the reports coming back were getting more and more ridiculous. She had been there for 3 years at this point and had booked maybe one commercial for a local furniture store. But to hear my parents tell it, she was networking with industry professionals and building her brand. They were still somehow sending her $800 every month. When I asked how they could afford it while claiming they needed my $1,200 just to survive, they'd get defensive and change the subject. My dad would say things like, "Brooklyn's situation is more complicated than you understand," or "she's investing in her future." But I was starting to do math in my head. $800 a month for 3 years was almost $29,000. Where was that money coming from if they were as broke as they claimed? One day I asked my mom directly, "How are you sending Brooklyn money every month when you can barely afford groceries?" She got flustered and said, "We make sacrifices for both our daughters. Brooklyn just happens to need more support right now because she's at a crucial stage in her career." I wanted to ask what career she was talking about, since Brooklyn hadn't worked in months, but I was too tired to fight about it. I graduated nursing school at 29 with the highest honors in my class and a perfect GPA. The day of my graduation ceremony, I was so proud I could barely contain myself. I had worked harder for this achievement than I'd ever worked for anything in my life. I had proven to myself that I was capable of more than just being everyone else's caretaker and financial support system. My parents didn't come to my graduation. They said they couldn't afford the gas money to drive 2 hours to my school, and my dad claimed his arthritis was acting up. That same weekend, they drove 4 hours to attend some art gallery opening where Brooklyn had 0 pieces displayed, but where she was networking with potential collaborators. But you know what? I didn't let their absence ruin my day. I walked across that stage knowing I had earned every step, and Dr. Martinez was in the audience cheering for me. He brought his wife, and they took photos of me in my cap and gown. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. I got a job at the Children's Hospital in our city, starting at $58,000 a year. After 8 years of making $12 an hour at retail jobs, it felt like winning the lottery. For the first time since I was 18, I had health insurance, paid time off, and a steady schedule. I was going to be helping children heal from trauma and illness. It felt like the most meaningful work I could possibly do. But I made a calculated decision. I told my parents I was making $35,000, not $58,000. I knew if they found out my real salary, their demands for money would increase exponentially. I started giving them $800 a month instead of $1,200, claiming my student loans were taking a big chunk of my paycheck. I was still living at home, partly to save money, but mostly because I was afraid of what would happen to my parents if I left completely. I was still doing most of the caregiving tasks, still managing their medications and appointments, still handling their insurance and paperwork. The strangest part was how my parents treated my career achievement. They wouldn't tell neighbors or relatives that I had become a nurse. When people asked what I was doing, they'd say vague things like, "Ellie's working at the hospital," or "She got a job in healthcare." But they would spend 20 minutes bragging about Brooklyn's latest callback for a major commercial that inevitably never resulted in anything. I was literally saving children's lives every day at work, helping families through their worst moments, being thanked by parents for my compassion and skill. But that wasn't worth mentioning compared to Brooklyn's imaginary Hollywood success. This story gets so much more intense from here. If you're finding it as fascinating as I hoped you would, please consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and sharing this with someone who needs to hear it. And definitely comment below because I want to know what you would have done in this situation. It really helps me know I'm on the right track with this content. Over the next 5 years, I threw myself into my nursing career with everything I had. I wasn't just working for the paycheck anymore. I had found my true calling, and I was determined to be the best nurse I could possibly be. I worked extra shifts whenever possible, not just for the money, but because I genuinely loved what I was doing. I specialized in pediatric trauma care, which is one of the most emotionally demanding areas of nursing. I was working with children who had been in accidents, had serious illnesses, or were dealing with abuse situations. It required incredible emotional strength, technical skill, and the ability to provide comfort to both patients and their terrified families. By the time I turned 34, I had been promoted to senior nurse and was making $78,000 a year. I was one of the most requested nurses in the pediatric unit. Parents would specifically ask for me when their children were admitted because I had developed a reputation for being exceptionally caring, competent, and calm under pressure. The hospital administration gave me an award for excellence in pediatric care. I had been chosen out of over 200 nurses for going above and beyond in patient care. I had letters from families thanking me for literally saving their children's lives, not just medically, but emotionally. Parents would write about how I helped them navigate the worst moments of their lives with grace and compassion. I was respected by doctors who would specifically request me for their most challenging cases. I was loved by patients who would draw me pictures and ask when I'd be back to work. I was valued by my colleagues who saw me as a leader and mentor. But at home, I was still just the backup daughter who paid the bills. I was secretly building an emergency fund, carefully saving every dollar I could hide from my parents. I had been accepted to an online nurse practitioner program that would allow me to advance to an even higher level of care, potentially making over $100,000 a year once I graduated. My life was finally moving in the direction I wanted it to go. Meanwhile, Brooklyn had been in LA for 8 years at this point, and her acting career was becoming more embarrassing by the year. She had booked maybe 4 commercials total, one for a local furniture store, one for a car dealership, one for a restaurant chain, and one for some kind of cleaning product. None of them were national campaigns, and the total money she'd made from all of them combined was probably less than $5,000. But somehow, my parents were still sending her $800 every month. When I did the math in my head, I realized they had sent her over $76,000 over the years to fund this failed dream. $76,000 to support someone who refused to get a real job. Brooklyn's social media had become increasingly delusional over the years. She posted constantly about her upcoming projects and meetings with producers that never seemed to materialize into actual work. She had started calling herself a multi-hyphenate creative and was always working on some new artistic venture, photography, jewelry making, life coaching, spiritual wellness guidance. None of these ventures ever made money or lasted more than a few months. Most recently, she had decided she was going to be a lifestyle influencer and was constantly posting about her authentic living journey and creative entrepreneurship. She had about 300 followers, most of whom were family members or people she'd gone to high school with. I was living a complete double life by this point. At work, I was a respected healthcare professional making almost $80,000 a year, trusted with the lives of critically ill children, recognized for excellence in my field. At home, I was still the struggling daughter who made $45,000 and needed to contribute most of her paycheck to keep the family afloat. The cognitive dissonance was becoming harder and harder to manage. I'd spend my days saving children's lives, being thanked by grateful families, receiving recognition from doctors and administrators. Then I'd come home to parents who treated my career like it was a hobby I was indulging in while Brooklyn pursued real success. I'll never forget one family dinner where my parents spent 30 minutes bragging about Brooklyn's latest breakthrough. She had supposedly gotten a callback for a Netflix series, which, like all her other callbacks, would never result in anything. But they were so excited, calling relatives, posting on Facebook about their successful actress daughter, talking about how this was going to be her big break. Meanwhile, sitting right there at the table, I had just received that hospital award for excellence in pediatric care. The week before, I had literally saved a 3-year-old's life when I noticed subtle signs of sepsis that other medical staff had missed. Because I caught it early and advocated for immediate intervention, that child went home healthy instead of ending up in the ICU or worse. When I mentioned the award during a lull in the Brooklyn celebration, my dad just nodded absently and immediately changed the subject back to Brooklyn's audition. My mom said, "That's nice, honey," in the same tone you'd use to acknowledge a child's finger painting. I was starting to feel like I was going crazy. I was making more money and having more professional success than Brooklyn had ever had in her entire life, but somehow her imaginary achievements were always more important than my real ones. I was also starting to notice things that didn't add up about my parents' finances. They claimed we were constantly broke, that they needed my $800 every month just to survive and pay basic bills. But somehow they always had money to send Brooklyn. And they'd make comments about how they wish they could afford things like a new car or home repairs, but then I'd see receipts for expensive gifts they'd sent Brooklyn for her birthday or Christmas. My mom would complain about how expensive groceries were getting, then mention casually that they'd sent Brooklyn money for some professional headshots that cost $600. My dad would stress about the electric bill, then talk about how they'd helped Brooklyn pay for acting classes in LA. Something was very wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. I just knew that the math didn't add up between their claims of poverty and their ability to constantly support Brooklyn's expensive lifestyle. Around this time, I started doing something that I'm almost embarrassed to admit now. I was anonymously paying for things my family needed, then pretending the money came from somewhere else. I thought I was being generous and helpful. Looking back, I realized I was enabling their worst behaviors and making their entitlement even more extreme. When my parents had an $18,000 medical debt that they were panicking about, it was from my dad's last emergency room visit and some specialized testing that insurance didn't fully cover. I secretly paid it through the hospital's charity program. I told them they'd been selected for debt forgiveness based on their income level, and they just accepted that explanation without question. When Brooklyn called crying about how she needed money for acting classes with some renowned coach in LA, I sent the money through a fake work raffle that I pretended to have won. I told my parents I'd won a $1,000 gift card at work and wanted to help Brooklyn with her career development. I paid for my parents' car repairs by claiming I'd gotten a bonus at work. I bought them groceries and told them I had coupons. I even paid for Brooklyn's professional headshots by saying my hospital had a photography program for employee family members. I thought I was being generous and loving. I thought I was taking care of my family without making them feel bad about taking money from me. Looking back, I realized I was just teaching them that money would always appear when they needed it, and that they never had to actually appreciate the source. The breaking point of my generosity came when my parents approached me with their most outrageous demand yet. Brooklyn had decided that LA wasn't working out and that she needed to move to New York to pursue Broadway. She was 30 years old at this point and had absolutely nothing to show for her 8 years in California except a handful of commercial appearances and a social media account full of delusional posts about her artistic journey. My parents wanted me to work extra shifts for 2 months straight to fund Brooklyn's move to New York, security deposit, first month's rent, moving expenses, and enough money to support her for the first few months while she got established in the theater scene. They calculated that if I picked up overtime every week for 8 weeks, I could generate an extra $4,000 to send Brooklyn. They presented this to me like it was a reasonable request, like it was my responsibility as her sister to sacrifice my health and free time so she could chase another impossible dream in a new city. When I hesitated, not refused, just hesitated to immediately agree, they accused me of being jealous of Brooklyn's opportunities and not caring about family success. My mom actually said, Brooklyn has talent and potential. She deserves a chance to make something of herself. You have a steady job. You should be happy to help your sister achieve her dreams. That's when I realized that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. And no matter what I achieved professionally, it would never be as important as Brooklyn's latest fantasy career change. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about this next part because the level of deception and betrayal is unbelievable. Stories like this take incredible courage to share, and I want to bring you more of them. If you're invested in seeing how this turns out, subscribing, liking, and sharing this video tells me you want more content like this, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt like your family's personal ATM? Your stories and support help others feel less alone, and sharing this video could help someone else in a similar situation. The final straw came just 2 months ago, and it started with my dad having his second stroke. He was 69 years old, and while this stroke wasn't as severe as his first one 15 years earlier, it was still scary and required extensive medical intervention and coordination. As usual, I handled everything. I took time off work, using my precious vacation days, to coordinate his care. I spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, researching the best rehabilitation options, scheduling appointments with specialists, and making sure he had everything he needed for recovery. I arranged for a hospital bed to be delivered to the house. I researched physical therapists and speech therapists. I modified their bathroom to make it wheelchair accessible. I created a medication schedule and taught my mom how to help him with his exercises. I coordinated with his doctors to make sure his recovery plan was optimal. Brooklyn, meanwhile, was in New York pursuing her latest career pivot. She had decided she was going to be a spiritual wellness coach and was taking some kind of online certification course that cost $3,000. When I called to tell her about Dad's stroke, her response was that she couldn't handle hospitals and the stress of family medical emergencies was really triggering for her creative energy. She called once during Dad's 2-week hospital stay to check on him, then went radio silent for 3 weeks. Her Instagram during this time was full of posts about setting boundaries with toxic family dynamics and protecting your peace from other people's drama. I'm not kidding. She was posting inspirational quotes about self-care while her father was relearning how to walk. After Dad was stable and back home, my parents sat me down for what they called an urgent family meeting. The conversation that followed was so shocking that I still can't believe it actually happened. They told me that Dad's recovery was going to require full-time care for several months, help with bathing, dressing, physical therapy exercises, medication management, transportation to appointments, and constant supervision to make sure he didn't fall or injure himself further. Then they presented their solution. They wanted me to quit my job at the hospital and become Dad's full-time caregiver. Let me be clear about what they were asking. They wanted me to give up my $78,000 career that I had worked 10 years to build, my health insurance, my retirement contributions, and my professional identity to provide free labor that would normally cost them thousands of dollars per month for professional in-home care. When I asked what Brooklyn would contribute to this arrangement, the answer was mind-blowing. They said Brooklyn's career was at a crucial stage and she couldn't be expected to put her dreams on hold. My mom actually said, Brooklyn's spiritual wellness coaching certification could really take off, and she's finally found her true calling. We can't ask her to abandon that when she's so close to success. I pointed out that I also had a career where I was literally saving children's lives and making good money. My dad's response was something I'll never forget. Brooklyn's career is more important than yours because she has real talent and unlimited potential. You're just a nurse. You can always get another nursing job later. Just a nurse. After 10 years of sacrifice, after working myself into the hospital, after achieving professional recognition and making a real difference in the world, I was just a nurse whose career was disposable. When I refused, when I said I would help coordinate Dad's care and contribute financially for professional caregivers, but I wouldn't destroy my career, they completely lost it. My dad called me heartless and said I was a selfish nurse who doesn't even care about her own family. My mom said I was jealous of Brooklyn's success and opportunities, and that's why I wouldn't sacrifice for the family. They accused me of being money-obsessed and forgetting where I came from. That conversation broke something inside me that had been cracking for years. I realized that to them, my career wasn't real. My achievements didn't matter. My financial contributions weren't appreciated. I was just the backup daughter whose job was to provide money and labor while the golden child pursued her dreams. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to help them apply for increased disability benefits for Dad, not because I wanted to continue enabling them, but because I wanted to see exactly what their financial situation really was. I went to Dad's office to gather all his medical and financial paperwork for the disability application. That's when I made the discovery that shattered my entire understanding of my family. I was going through Dad's desk, looking for his Social Security paperwork and medical records, when I found a folder I'd never seen before tucked away in the back of his bottom drawer. It was labeled Estate Planning, Life Insurance Policies. My heart started racing. I knew I shouldn't look. It felt like an invasion of privacy. But after 16 years of sacrificing everything for this family, after being told my career was disposable while Brooklyn's imaginary success was precious, I felt like I had a right to know how they were planning for the future. I opened the folder with shaking hands. The first thing I saw was a life insurance policy worth $320,000. $320,000. I stared at that number for a full minute, trying to process it. My parents, who claimed they were living paycheck to paycheck on disability payments, had a life insurance policy worth more than most people make in 5 years. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. As I kept looking through the papers, I found bank statements for a savings account I didn't know existed. The current balance was $85,000. $85,000 in savings while they were taking $800 a month from me because they couldn't afford basic expenses. Then I found the disability payment records that made my blood run cold. My father had been receiving $2,100 every month in disability payments for 8 years. $2,100 every month for 8 years. Do the math on that. That's over $200,000 in disability income over 8 years. Money they had claimed they weren't receiving. Money they had hidden from me while taking my hard-earned salary every month. But as I sat there staring at those bank statements and disability records, I realized this wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I found next. Their will. I'm not proud of reading it, but I needed to know. After discovering they had hidden over $400,000 from me while claiming poverty, I had to see what their actual plans were for the future. What I found destroyed me completely. Everything. The house worth about $150,000, the life insurance policy worth $320,000, the savings account with $85,000, even the furniture, including my childhood bedroom set, was going to Brooklyn. Every single thing. There was one line about me in the entire document. We love both our daughters equally, but we believe Brooklyn needs more support to achieve her artistic goals and fulfill her potential. But there was also a handwritten note attached to the will that made me physically nauseous. Brooklyn has always been our pride and joy. She deserves security so she can focus on her artistic pursuits without worrying about money. She has such a bright future ahead of her. I sat in that chair, staring at those papers, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. I had spent 16 years, sacrificing my health, my youth, my dreams, and over $300,000 of my own money for people who had secretly accumulated over $400,000 while planning to leave me absolutely nothing. Not only had they taken my money under false pretenses, but they had written me out of their will completely while leaving everything to my lazy, unemployed sister who had never contributed a single dollar to the family. Brooklyn, who at 31 years old had never held a steady job, who had cost the family over $76,000 in support over the years, who couldn't even call to check on our father when he had a stroke. She was inheriting everything. And me? The daughter who had worked herself into the hospital, who had given up her youth and education and relationships, who had literally kept this family financially afloat for 16 years. I was getting nothing. I don't remember much about the next few hours. I think I just sat there in that chair, staring at those papers, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. 16 years of my life. Over $300,000 of my money. My health, my relationships, my opportunities, all sacrificed for people who saw me as completely disposable. The math was staggering. I had given them an average of $19,000 a year for 16 years. That's over $300,000 total. Meanwhile, they had received over $200,000 in disability payments and saved $85,000 while claiming they were broke. They had a life insurance policy worth more than most people will ever see in their lifetime. But then something shifted inside me. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't sad or defeated. I was angry. Really, truly angry. Not the exhausted, hopeless kind of sadness I usually felt, but pure, righteous fury at the injustice of it all. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, the bank statements, the disability records, the will, the life insurance policy, everything. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it. I called Brooklyn and told her she needed to come home immediately for a family emergency. I didn't tell her what it was about, just that it was urgent and she needed to be here within 2 days. Then I called my parents and told them I had made a decision about Dad's care situation, and we needed to have a family meeting when Brooklyn arrived. The next 2 days were surreal. I went to work as normal, took care of my patients, received compliments from colleagues and gratitude from families. But inside, I was planning the most important conversation of my life. Brooklyn arrived on a Thursday evening, complaining about the expensive last-minute flight and how this emergency was disrupting her spiritual wellness journey. She looked annoyed and put out, like she was doing us all a huge favor by showing up. That night, I asked them to sit down in the living room because I had something important to tell them. I put printed copies of all the financial documents on the coffee table. I have several things to tell you all, I said, my voice completely calm. First, I know about the $320,000 life insurance policy. I know about the $85,000 in savings. I know about Dad's disability payments that have totaled over $200,000 over 8 years. And I know about the will that leaves everything to Brooklyn. The silence in that room was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. My dad's face went completely white. My mom started to stutter some kind of excuse. But Brooklyn had the audacity to look annoyed, like I was interrupting her day with tedious family financial details. I also have something else to tell you, I continued. I don't make $45,000 a year like I told you. I make $78,000. I've been accepted to nurse practitioner school, which will increase my salary to over $100,000 when I graduate. I have an award for excellence in pediatric care. I've saved children's lives. I'm respected by doctors and loved by patients. I'm successful, and I built that success while you were systematically draining me of over $300,000 under false pretenses. That's when everything exploded. My dad immediately tried to switch tactics. We're so proud of you. We always knew you'd be successful. Family shares everything. That's what family does. My mom started crying. We were just trying to protect Brooklyn. She's more sensitive than you. She needs more help to succeed. And Brooklyn said something that I will never, ever forget as long as I live. It's not like you need the money anyway. You just said yourself you're successful. Why are you being so dramatic about this? That's when I realized they had learned absolutely nothing. They weren't sorry for lying to me for 16 years. They weren't apologetic for taking over $300,000 under false pretenses. They weren't embarrassed about writing me out of the will while planning to leave everything to my unemployed sister. They were just recalculating how much money they could get from me now that they knew my real income. If you're as disgusted by this family's immediate pivot to greed as I was when I heard this story, you're definitely part of our community that believes family should be about mutual respect, not exploitation. Please subscribe, give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to put yourself first sometimes. Tell me in the comments, how would you handle discovering this level of financial deception from your own family? I read every comment, and your support helps others feel less alone in these situations. What happened over the next few weeks was like something out of a psychological thriller. Once my parents realized I wasn't immediately offering to share my new wealth with them and support Brooklyn's latest career fantasy, they launched a campaign of harassment that was truly unhinged. It started with manufactured medical emergencies. Suddenly, every few days, there was some crisis that required my immediate attention and money. Dad's blood pressure was spiking, and they needed money for expensive medications that insurance supposedly didn't cover. Mom's arthritis was flaring, and they needed money for special treatments and supplements. Every emergency was conveniently expensive, urgent, and required my immediate financial intervention. The medical emergencies were elaborate and manipulative. They would call me at work, crying about how Dad was having chest pains and they needed me to leave immediately to take him to the hospital. When I'd arrive, rushing from the pediatric unit where I was caring for critically ill children, Dad would be sitting comfortably watching TV, claiming he felt much better now, but they still needed money for preventive medications. When I started questioning these emergencies, asking to see medical bills or suggesting they call their doctor instead of me, they accused me of not caring about their health and being too obsessed with money to prioritize family. Brooklyn launched her own campaign on social media that was breathtakingly shameless. She posted long, emotional Facebook posts about how her money-obsessed sister had discovered their parents' modest savings and was now refusing to help with their medical expenses. She painted me as this cold, greedy person who cared more about money than family, conveniently leaving out the part where she was inheriting everything while contributing nothing. Her posts were masterpieces of manipulation. It's so heartbreaking when money changes people. My sister found out our parents have a small emergency fund saved up, and now she's refusing to help with Dad's medical care. I'm trying to support them from New York while pursuing my spiritual wellness practice, but I can't afford to carry the whole financial burden alone. Please send positive energy to our family during this difficult time." The responses from her 300 followers were exactly what she wanted, people calling me selfish and heartless for abandoning my sick parents. Of course, none of them knew that I had supported this family financially for 16 years while Brooklyn contributed $0. The extended family got involved in a way that was truly disturbing. Aunts, uncles, and cousins started calling me to express their disappointment in my behavior. They had only heard my parents' version of events, that I had suddenly become greedy and cut off my poor, sick parents after discovering they had managed to save a little money. "How can you be so cold, Ellie? They raised you. They sacrificed everything for you and Brooklyn growing up. Now they're old and sick and you're abandoning them over money." None of them knew the real story. They didn't know about the 16 years of sacrifice, the $300,000 I had contributed, the secret disability payments, or the will that left me nothing. They just saw what my parents wanted them to see, a selfish daughter who had turned her back on her family. The campaign reached its peak when my parents showed up at my hospital and asked to speak with my supervisor. They told her that I was neglecting my family duties and that the stress of having such an uncaring daughter was negatively affecting Dad's recovery from his stroke. They suggested that maybe the hospital should have a conversation with me about my priorities and whether someone with such poor family values should be trusted with patient care. I was mortified. These people were trying to sabotage my career, the career I had sacrificed everything to build, the career they had just told me was disposable compared to Brooklyn's imaginary success. Thank God my supervisor, Janet, knew me well enough to see through this manipulation. She had watched me provide exceptional care for 3 years and had personally given me the Excellence Award. She told my parents that my professional performance was exemplary and that my personal family dynamics were none of the hospital's business. But the fact that they had tried to damage my reputation at work was the final straw. They were willing to destroy the career I had built while supporting them, just to manipulate me into giving them more money. That night, I went home and wrote the longest letter I've ever written in my life. I sat at my kitchen table and documented everything, every sacrifice, every dollar contributed, every lie they had told, every manipulation they had attempted. I wrote out the financial timeline, how I had given them an average of $19,000 a year for 16 years, totaling over $300,000. How they had secretly received over $200,000 in disability payments while claiming they got nothing. How they had saved $85,000 while taking my money for basic expenses. How they had a life insurance policy worth $320,000 while claiming poverty. I wrote about the will that left everything to Brooklyn while giving me nothing. I wrote about Brooklyn's complete lack of contribution to the family, $0 over 16 years, while receiving over $76,000 in support for her failed career attempts. I wrote about the career I had built despite their discouragement, the awards I had received, the lives I had saved, and how they had dismissed it all as less important than Brooklyn's imaginary achievements. Then I sent copies of this letter to every single member of our extended family. Every aunt, uncle, cousin, and family friend who had been pressuring me to do right by my family got the full story with documentation. I also wrote a simple Facebook post that said, "After 16 years of caregiving and financial support totaling over $300,000, I discovered I was completely written out of my parents' will in favor of my sister, who has never contributed financially to the family. I've also discovered they've been receiving substantial disability income while claiming poverty. I've given enough for several lifetimes. Sometimes the people who take the most give the least back." The responses were immediate and overwhelming. Relatives started reaching out to apologize for judging me without knowing the full story. Family friends were shocked by the financial details. Even people I hadn't talked to in years were commenting their support and sharing their own stories of family financial manipulation. But the most important thing I did was send one final text message to my parents. "You've received over $200,000 in disability payments plus $19,200 per year from me for 16 years, while saving $85,000 and planning to leave me nothing. You chose to plan a future that didn't include me. Now you get to live that future without my financial support. Don't contact me again." Then I sent a separate message to Brooklyn. "You're inheriting over $500,000 from people who spent $76,000 supporting your non-existent career, while I contributed $300,000 plus to keep them afloat. Enjoy your inheritance. You're going to need it since you've never learned how to support yourself." Then I blocked all their numbers, blocked them on all social media, and went to my apartment complex's office to make sure they couldn't access my building. For the first time in 16 years, I chose myself over their manipulation. It's been 2 months since I went completely no contact with my family, and I want to tell you exactly where I am now because this story has a happy ending. I started the nurse practitioner program last month, and I'm absolutely thriving. The coursework is challenging, but after years of working under extreme stress while studying for my original nursing degree, this feels manageable and exciting. When I graduate in 18 months, I'll be making around $110,000 a year, and I'll be able to provide even higher level care to patients. I'm dating someone now, a fellow nurse from the emergency department named Marcus, who thinks my compassion and strength are attractive qualities, not weaknesses to be exploited. He's the first person I've dated who actually appreciates the work I do and supports my career goals. When I told him my family story, his response was, "You're amazing for surviving that and still choosing to dedicate your life to helping others." I sleep through the night now. For the first time in over a decade, I don't lie awake calculating bills or worrying about family emergencies. I don't have panic attacks anymore. I've lost the stress weight I carried for years, 25 pounds that just melted off once the constant cortisol stopped flooding my system. I joined a gym and started taking cooking classes, things I never had time or energy for when I was working constantly to support everyone else. I discovered I actually love rock climbing, and I'm pretty good at making homemade pasta. These might seem like small things, but they represent having time and mental space for my own interests for the first time in my adult life. I bought my own apartment, a beautiful one-bedroom place near the hospital where I can walk to work. It's the first space that's ever been truly mine. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, with plants and artwork and comfortable furniture that no one can take away from me. I heard through a mutual friend, my dad's brother, who apologized profusely after reading my letter, that my parents have had to dip significantly into their secret savings to maintain their lifestyle now that they don't have my monthly contributions. Apparently, they're struggling to adjust to living on just the $2,100 in monthly disability payments plus their savings. Brooklyn moved back home from New York after her spiritual wellness coaching certification failed to generate any income. Her business never acquired a single paying client. She's now 31 years old, living in her childhood bedroom, with no job, no prospects, and no idea how to support herself since she's never had to before. My parents are apparently pressuring her to get a temporary job to help with household expenses, but she's resisting because she doesn't want to compromise her artistic integrity by working in retail or food service. The irony is not lost on me. The most amazing part of my new life is how it's opened up socially and emotionally. I have real friendships now, relationships with people who appreciate what I bring to the table and reciprocate that energy. I have colleagues who respect my expertise and seek out my opinions. I have patients' families who send me thank you cards months after their children have recovered. I volunteer at a local animal shelter on weekends, something I never had time for before. I've taken weekend trips to visit friends in other cities. I went to a music festival last month, my first concert in over 10 years. I want to be absolutely clear about something. I don't feel guilty. I know some people might think I should feel bad for cutting off my elderly, sick parents, but I don't feel an ounce of guilt. They had 16 years to treat me like a valued family member instead of a financial resource. They chose to see me as disposable while planning to reward my lazy sister's lack of contribution. They made their choice when they wrote that will. They made their choice every time they sent Brooklyn money while taking mine. They made their choice when they hid their true financial situation while manipulating me into sacrificing my youth and health. I finally understand the difference between being used and being loved. Being used feels heavy, exhausting, and endless. There's always another crisis, another demand, another way you're falling short. Being loved feels light and supportive. People celebrate your successes, respect your boundaries, and want to contribute to your happiness. My patients' families love me. My colleagues love me. Marcus loves me. These people see my value and appreciate what I bring to their lives. They don't see me as a source of money or free labor. They see me as a whole person worthy of respect and care. I stopped trying to earn love that was never actually available, and instead I found people who value what I give freely and reciprocate that energy. Ellie's story is one of the most powerful examples I've ever heard of someone choosing themselves over toxic family obligation and finding their real worth. Her courage to walk away from 16 years of financial and emotional manipulation is incredible. I have so many more stories like this. People who chose themselves over family guilt and discovered their true value. Please subscribe to Revenge with Nick, give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to put yourself first. Hit that notification bell because these stories will change how you think about duty, love, and self-worth forever. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in Ellie's situation. Your stories help others feel less alone and realize they're not crazy for wanting to be valued. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in Ellie's experience, if you're the one everyone calls when they need money, time, or help, but you're never the one who gets celebrated, appreciated, or included in future plans, please hear this. Your worth isn't determined by what you can provide for other people. Family isn't just about blood or obligation. Real family is about mutual respect, genuine care, and reciprocal support. If the people in your life only value you for what you can give them, your money, your time, your labor, your sacrifice, that's not family. That's exploitation with a biological connection. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve to have your achievements celebrated, not dismissed. You deserve to be included in future plans, not written off as disposable. And you deserve to have boundaries that are respected, not constantly violated. Your story doesn't have to end with sacrifice and disappointment. You can choose yourself too. Thank you for listening to Ellie's story, and remember, you're worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions, expectations, or price tags. You deserve better, and it's never too late to choose a life that honors your worth.